Hi everyone, James here from F9 and welcome to the Ableton demonstration for our F9 Origins Classic Club Keys and Synths release. So today we're going to use just a small selection of the 333 patches that come in the 11GB Classic Club Keys and Synths library, as well as some of the other releases from the Origins range to make a track from start to finish. This video will be heavily edited to give you just the choicest bites. And I'd like to do something quite different today and actually create a cover of one of my favourite 90s tracks, I Trance You by Gypsy, originally released on Limbo Records. If you know it, you know it. If you don't, go and check out the original. It's amazing. Okay, let's just dive straight in. So this is what we're ultimately going to be working towards. Let me just give you a quick blast. And this track has always been about those piano chords for me, and it's an absolute pleasure to recreate it. And everything that you're seeing here has been built just purely from the F9 Origins range. But let's back up and go right back to the beginning. So first of all, I'm going to head to the F9 Origins beats and I'm going to pick up one of these beat pages, which is a whole selection of stems. I'm going to go for this one, Plato 909 at 125 BPM. So let's just boot that. Now, these stem sets give you a great starting point, and it's what I want to begin with here, because I find if you're programming to good sounding drums, the inspiration's already flowing and then you don't have to stop and go back and do everything. So this is the Plato beat, the main section. Okay, sounding great already, but there's a couple of things I might just lose. First of all, this percussion loop, it's a little too funky. And there's also one quite skippy clap that I'm just going to take out at the top here called mini clap. Already a lot more driving. There's a great build up in the middle. So these are the starting points, and now what I'm going to do is actually instantly start arranging. Now that may seem crazy, we've not even put any musical parts in, but I find it instantly gets you past that kind of looping problem. If you arrange even basic drums right from the outset, then there's no way that you can get stuck in an 8-bar loop, because there's always something happening on either side of the bit that you're actually working on. Okay, so here we go, and it looks like I've done a lot, but all I've really done is just move sections around. I'm just starting with the kick here. Use the snare fill that was in that initial build. One interesting little trick, just for a couple of bars before one section starts, I've duplicated the kick onto another track and just put a high-pass filter in at about 100 Hertz. That means you get this wonderful lift as the kick drum's kind of there, but without the sub, and then it smashes back in. Now, as you can see, we've got quite a sizable breakdown in the middle of this. That's where those key parts are really going to kick off. I've left one of the loops playing just over it so that we've got some timing information while we play those parts in. Now, I do want to add some additional loops and effects, and I'm going to do these from the additional folders that are within the F9 Beats collection. These are all pre-warped for Ableton, by the way, so you can drop them on and they will sync to tempo. Okay, so these are the parts that I've added. Got a tasty little loop here. This wicked riser. One more riser. Oh, there's one little crash at the top here. So coming into a breakdown, they sound like this. Now, I've also put some of the round robin kits in here. Now, what people don't realise about an 808 and a 909 is that a lot of the parts, in fact, all of them from an 808 are analog synthesizers. And that means that the only way to truly capture it, because every sound is minutely different, is to actually sample them in round robin. Now, with Ableton, we do have to create a kind of pseudo round robin, so it's a kind of random pick from the sample pool. But the results can be stunning, particularly on things like claps, because they will hit reverbs completely differently each time as they're made out of white noise. Okay, let's start building this up. So we're going to use this main piano part. The chords are amazing. The guy who wrote this, in my opinion, is a bit of a genius. Now, this patch that we're using is the F9 Origins 1994 piano. This is a brand new sample set. This isn't a replication of anything that was in our old school pianos, the limited edition collection. It is one of my favorite patches for putting old school piano riffs together because it's really thick and you can actually layer additional bits on top, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, I actually think the original may have used sample chords. I'm not quite sure, but there was one sound that sounded like it was an octave lower than all of the rest. And all I've done to create that is to actually take the same 1994 piano patch and inside the controls of the simpler, take it down an octave. And it does just sound like an old Detroit stab. So that's one part. Now I am also layering this up. We've got a warm piano layer from the Keys and Synths collection. And on the rack controls, I've just increased the spread. Now, the spread is an actual parameter inside of Ableton Sampler, and it basically creates a kind of pseudo unison. So as I turn this up, you'll hear it get a little wider. So do experiment with that control on every single one of the racks. Now, whilst we're here, I just want to quickly show you the navigation of where all of these instruments are. I'm inside the Keys and Synths master folder, and here you twirl down the Keys and Synths racks, and you can see that it's actually split up by the type of instruments: organs, synths, strings, plucks and guitars, extra basses, classic keys, pads, and of course at the top, stabs. Now, we will have some fun with these later on, but you can see there's a huge amount. And all of the classics, all of the main food groups are actually represented there. Now let's add some more layers. And this particular piano patch, the SQ8 from the Classic Keys and Synths collection, is from an Ensoniq SQ80. Now this was quite important to early house because it was one of the few synths available before the Korg M1 turned up that actually had a passable piano patch without needing samplers and that kind of thing. It sounds like this. I'm just going to take some of the processing back a little bit. Now, this was famously used by Adamski on tracks like Killer, and I believe by some of the early US luminaries as well. So I'm just going to add a little bit more processing, some of the spread, filter some of the bottom out. And one more layer, and let's have a Juno patch. And I'm sure you can hear there just how useful some of these rack controls are at dialing in an initial tone. All right, let's listen to how these parts are starting to stack up. So now let's pull back from the breakdown and get this main groove section done. And this is what I've built up already. Now this comprises of a couple of things. First of all, we've got this sub bass patch called Da Sub that's out of the F9 Origins bass collection. And that's been sidechained by the kick, as you can see there. And then from the Synths and Keys collection, we've got this pluck sound, playing in the lower octaves. And then later on, I'm just going to bring an extra bass patch in, once again from the Origins bass collection. So really starting to drive forward already, and that's the beauty of some of these more low bit sounds like the things out of the SQ80. They fire against bass sounds, analog bass sounds like this really, really well. So now I'm going to use another one of these sounds from some of the early romplers that were around in the house era. This is actually quite a chiffy sound. But again, some of the beauty of these things is to investigate them down in the lower registers. Because you put them against the basses and that's where the magic happens. And what you're basically hearing is a sound that was recorded at much higher pitches actually being transposed down to an octave that it wasn't meant to be played in. And that's one of the key techniques from early 90s house music, because that's where all the grit and the power of those low bit converters were. Now, I've just added a couple of other things. I've got another part just playing this particular riff and fading up. Now we've got the beginning of some chordal information coming through. And I've just stuck the main piano riffs here into a little group so we can process them later on. Now, one trick here you might have seen, in these chords, I've got a full voicing for the actual breakdown and then a much more stripped down version, just effectively 2 notes. And you will find there's a lot of little chord moves that you can place over just a 1 note or rolling bass line and they will work. And it's particularly useful to pick out certain elements of your main chord sequence and just fire them over the top. Okay, now let's just start to build a few things up. I'm going to take a simple version of the chord moves and put them over the first breakdown that I arranged into the drums. And it'll come crashing back out of that without those chords. And also, I've taken the same pad sound that we used in that breakdown and just played a set of chords that will work with the main piano drops. And there is a big chord swell here from the Delmar pad that's part of the Classic Keys and Synth collection. And one of the beauties of 90s dance music is that you were allowed to do quite pretty chord moves, because as long as you had tough sections before it, everyone was up for that kind of euphoric chord move in the actual breakdowns. I think we lost some of this for many years, so it's quite nice to see these kind of warm chord moves coming back into productions at the moment. Okay, moving on, I've also just copied the bass line from the first part and one of the chunky sections, and it's working beautifully with the piano. We've probably got some number crunching to do and a bit of mixing, but I'm going to power through this and get all of the parts in. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I'm in Ableton Live 9. This is purely down to the screen capture software. Anything else will just cause clicks and pops. This pack is completely compatible with all versions of Live from 9.6 forward. That includes Live 11. And now it's time for one of my favourite sounds across the entire Keys and Synths release. This is actually almost like a raw waveform out of the Prophet VS, but those early digital synths had a real thickness to them, and going through an analog filter, it's got some real grit. Now, you've heard it on everything from hardcore records all the way up to Robin S. Show Me Love, I believe. But also, if you just increase the release a little bit and cover it in wet stuff, it can make an awesome little pickup stab. And there's one of our classic stabs from the Keys and Synths collection. Wet as hell, we've piled a ton of the reverb and delay that's on the rack on it. And then taken a lot of the bottom end off. Let me just open that back up so you can hear the power here. And what we did to create an awful lot of these stabs is to go back to Akai's first hardware sampler, the Akai S612, which is a 12-bit sampler, and it's got some actual live controls on the front. It will allow you to do live looping and that kind of thing, and a real analog filter. Used to save on some ridiculous little floppy disks that you can't even get anymore, but it's got that thick sound, and there's videos, I believe, of some of the early Chicago house pioneers actually using it. So it was one thing that was actually quite instrumental to things like Jack Your Body. Okay, there's another stab we're using here, just to add a little bit of extra grit to that section. A really distorted 303 style sound. Got some nice portamento. You can see I'm shaving off an awful lot of the bottom end to make these things fit. Once you've got a kick drum in there, you're going to have to do that. And actually, another blip that's from a Waldorf Microwave V1. The Waldorf microwaves are actually one of the first incarnations of wavetable synthesis, and the Microwave V1 used an analog filter as well as digital wavetable oscillators. And it's actually the younger sibling of the now legendary Waldorf Wave, one of those synths of lore that you see pop up every now and again on YouTube. Incredible machines, and they've got this digital bite to them. And I'm just carrying a few of those across there into the breakdown, and we'll come to mix all of those with some of the nice rack controls later on. But as you can hear, these kind of early digital devices have a thickness and a power that I'm really pleased to say we've captured perfectly here, because you can have quite full-on drums, and I am smashing this into a glue compressor, as you can see. And I'm using the clip circuit to kind of emulate some basic limiting so we know how it's going to sound when it comes together later on. And yet these things are still cutting through beautifully. Right, now let's do a bit of work that's concentrating on the breakdown. I'm just going to play you everything that I've done here, and then we'll go through it. So just really increasing the atmosphere before we hit those amazing piano chords. So I copied the pad again, and we've got one of the patches called Slippy Pad that comes off a Waldorf Microwave again. Why is it called Slippy? Well, it goes with this sound, which is a recreation of something quite famous. Also using this thing called OBX laser beam. Lovely brassy, great big reverby thing there, and I'm dropping it an octave for the second one. And to just get some weight on the bottom end, we're just sticking to a low D, which is the key of this track, on the Juno 60 bass patch that's in the Origins bass collection. And you may have heard one of my favourite sounds of all time. The sound of the North American loon, eh? Who would have thought it's back again? I've heard it so many times just recently. You can't have an early house track without some loons in it, and let's face it, there were a lot of loons dancing to early house tracks. If you've made it this far into the video, thanks so much for watching. I think it's time for an Easter egg. This is a 30% off coupon for F9 audio. It's one use per customer, but it won't run out on you, so you can use it whenever you want in the next few years. So moving forward on this track now, and I actually want to create a third section where the piano chords change for the outro of this track. Now this mirrors what happens on the original. But as you can see on this arrange page, I've actually got 3 separate piano groups. Now this is really easy to do inside of Ableton. You can just select a group from the track list and actually duplicate it and then pull bits and pieces in and out. And why this is important is that it allows you to apply completely separate processing between your different group sections. So for example, where the drums come in, you may want to take some of the bass end out, or you may want to use sidechain compression, but leave it nice and open for the breakdowns. So now back to the track, and we're going to go from the piano chords that we put in earlier. And what I've done here is actually added a little bit more EQ and a high pass filter so that it keeps out of the way of the bass when that happens. But then I want it to go back to that thicker sound as we hit this breakdown, and then the chords are going to change. Now that adds an extra lift just at this end section, and it's quite still warm and beautiful chords as we discussed in the breakdown, but because we've got a tough section that's at the beginning of this record, it kind of still works. It's not too fluffy. So I'm using the same pad sound again, but I've just added an extra little stab here. Now, even though that's minor and the chords are major, it's kind of just about working because all you're hearing is the real top end of it. So don't be afraid of using almost clashing chords, particularly if you're EQing them carefully, because sometimes that is a way to get a more authentic early house sound, because people in the day were just throwing anything that they could find into samplers and using it. Our microwave blip is going to make an appearance again at the end. I've also extended the bass down at the front of this. And by now we've pretty much got an arrangement of a full track. So now let's take just a little bit of a macro view on this whole thing. I've separated out the actual individual basses and the kind of clunky sounds that go with it. You'll see that I'm just starting to add some automation as we're starting to do the top and tailing of this record. So for example, some of the clunks here will start to fade out. Okay, so we're really starting to motor on this now, and I've done what I call a kind of static balance. So this is kind of pre-automation, and it's getting everything at a good operating level. So in other words, the mix has headroom on the master buses or any internal busing, and there's room for maneuver, most importantly. I've also really gone through and carefully leveled everything, and I've got a couple of tools to help me in this process. The first is a plug-in and hardware combination. So down in the master channel, you'll see this little box that is basically all this plugin does is take the audio stream on the particular channel that it's set up on and send it out via USB, and then that information is then read by this particular device. This is the TC Clarity M meter. And what's really handy is that you can actually start monitoring your levels on a hardware device whilst connected to a computer, so you're not having to pull up a plugin every single time. So here's the balance that I've got. as you can see, when I'm playing through, the sweet spot for this is between -17 and -11 on that meter. And I know when that happens, that there is room in the master chain. That means when I'm doing automation moves, that there's going to be headroom left. Even if I want to actually change the balance of the drums, there is still enough headroom within the actual operating levels of the DAW not to screw things up. And I'm not actually using any third-party plugins here at all. Everything on this session is completely Ableton's internal. A little bit of a smiley EQ curve, a little bit of compression, and then this second glue compressor is literally, you see I've got the range control all the way down here, so there's no compression happening, but it's just clipping. So there's two stages of clipping. The glue compressor afterwards is being fed forward a little bit into its clipping circuit, and then this one just a touch more. And that's a great little trick for Ableton, just to apply some limiting without any additional third-party plugs. The second little hardware addition is a pair of Aventone speakers, which are copies of the old Auratones mono speakers. Now, these are active monitors, the original ones you used to have to amp power. So these are perfect for a modern studio environment. And they're basically like the best grot box speakers you could possibly ask for. And what you will find is you will be able to balance things like hi-hats and claps and all of the more mid-rangey stuff on these far easier than you would do a full range or bigger modern monitor system. Okay, so now I've gone in and done a basic automation pass, and I'm doing things like taking this microwave blip and filtering the top and the bottom off and adding some reverb. Now, all of this is dead easy, and that's simply because we've got the macro control set up perfectly on all of the racks that come with the F9 Origins range. These key and synth racks are set up beautifully so that you can always do these nice simple moves on breakdowns, intros and outros, that kind of thing. Now, as you may have seen, just going back to the drums, I've added a couple of sections from some of the kits that are from the Origins Beats collection. I've added a ride, some faster clap patterns and sections, a couple of big hits from one of the effects menus, and they're just picking things out, just adding a little bit of what I like to call punctuation. They're almost like exclamation marks at certain parts of the track. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this, and now I'm actually going to apply a little bit of mastering. Now, as you can see, I've gotten rid of the two glue compressors, but I want to show you a remarkable little plugin from Eventide. This is the Omnipressor, and it's one of the first hardware compressors that was ever designed to do more creative stuff as opposed to just level control. And it is really, really bitey. So let's hear it in action. I'm just going to turn it on and off as we go through this. Got a real grab to it that's ever so useful for highly transient stuff. You can go really extreme with this compressor as well. Let me give you a quick example here. So yeah, it's quite a thing, and it adds a punch. Now I'm just going to add one addition of Ozone 9. It's not doing much, it's just adding a little bit of shelf on the bottom. A little bit of the harshness taken out around 6, and then just some maximizer to bring the level up. Dither on, always remember to turn this on if you're going to bounce out a 24-bit. Best settings are 24-bit and medium noise shaping. Let me quickly show you how hard it's working. So as you can hear, it's really starting to sound nice and dense. And this combination between the Omnipressor and a decent peak stop limiter like the one that's in Ozone can be really powerful. Now, always drop the ceiling just a tiny amount to give the actual master file a little bit of headroom. Anything that's going to go anywhere near a codec will need this to stop any kind of intersample peaks. And if it doesn't change the audio, always hit this button here, True Peak. That will also help stop that. In the days where everything was just CD, it wasn't too much of an issue, but pretty much anything is going to go to a codec now, and these things are important. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. We have now made a track using nothing more than the F9 Origins releases, the beats, the basses, and the actual keys and synths. We've arranged it, we've mixed it, and we've mastered it. So now I'm going to play it through for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.